Hi, before we find out what happens next, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. It takes a second and really help us grow. Out of the story.
The envelope looked like it belonged to a better life. Ivory, thick, hand addressed in looping ink that knew it was beautiful. I turned it over on my palm, pretending I didn't recognize the confident swoop of his initials pressed in gold on the flap. The mailroom smelled faintly of dryer sheets from the basement laundry. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I held the envelope to the edge of the table and heard my own voice say, steady enough to fool the stranger that is sometimes me, "Open it, Mara." I slid a butter knife under the seal. 2 names floated up on a cloud of cream cardstock. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered, though the laugh that followed didn't sound funny at all. "Everything okay down there?" Mrs. Alvarez called from the stairs, her slippers soft on the linoleum. "Invitation," I said, letting the card sway between my fingers. "Wrong address." "Ah," she said, then saw the names and didn't pretend. The card was tasteful and deliberate, like the woman who used to clip her bangs with office scissors at my husband's glass desk while saying, "I just need 5 minutes of his time, Mara, promise." She'd say promise like it cost her nothing, like she had pockets deep enough to carry other people's promises. I read it once, then again, the words settling in like dust. "You are joyfully invited." Joyfully. I pressed my thumb to his name as if I could smudge it away. I thought of the afternoon he'd come clean, the corporate phrase for spilling poison, sitting on our blue couch with his elbows on his knees, saying, "This isn't a betrayal, it's an evolution." And me, very calm, asking, "Then why does it feel like dying?" I took a breath that steadied my hands and turned the card over. "Kindly RSVP by the 12th. There was a tiny line for number attending, as if there were numbers for this kind of thing. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Mara. Just making sure you received the invite. No hard feelings, I hope. It would mean a lot to us if you could be there. Lila." I stared until the words blurred. "No hard feelings," I read aloud, and found my voice smooth, unbroken. Of course not. Why would a woman have hard feelings about being replaced by her husband's assistant with the key to the office and the password to his face? I put the RSVP card on the table and looked at the tiny return envelope already stamped, already decided. I felt the old impulse to call someone, to cry, to let anger run ahead of me like a dog off its leash. Instead, I remembered the quiet that followed the divorce hearing, the way the judge had met my eyes, the way I'd walked into sunlight and didn't stop walking. I set the butter knife down. Mrs. Alvarez hovered at the door. "You want tea?" she asked. "For shock." "I'm past shock," I said, folding the invitation back into itself as if I were tucking in a child who didn't belong to me. "But I won't waste good tea." I carried the card upstairs, laid it on the kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl, and took a picture. I sent it to my best friend, Sienna, who called immediately. "You're not going," she said, no greeting, because some lines don't need introductions. "I'm not reacting," I answered, and felt the words mark something inside me. "I'm choosing." "Choosing what?" "To let it be a beginning," I said. "But of what, I'll decide." Silence, then her sigh, warm in my ear. "Say the word, and I'll print petty flyers and drop them from a helicopter over their venue." "No helicopters," I said, almost smiling. "No noise. You're frightening when you're calm." "I finally noticed that calm is the only thing they can't use against me," I said, and slid the invitation into the drawer with the spare batteries and the measuring tape. Let's see how far it carries. When people say we fell out of love, I want to take their hands and correct them, gently, because I'm still me. Love doesn't fall. It gets moved, the way a couch gets inched out the door and down the steps and lifted into a truck you didn't order. It's labor and logistics. You wake up one day and your living room is echoing, and he says, "It's for the best," and you hear a truck back up somewhere. I met Aaron when we both thought working late meant we were brave. He was decisive and funny and adored the way I couldn't stop asking follow-ups in meetings. "You're tenacious," he told me on our second date, and I made the mistake of believing tenacious was a synonym for beloved. We built a life that looked good from the sidewalk. A narrow house with hydrangeas, 2 mugs that said morning person, and aspiring, a shoe rack that managed both our ambitions. The first time I noticed Lila, she was in a red sweater with little pearl buttons, laughing too brightly at a joke about printer toner. She had a talent for appearing essential. She anticipates, Aaron said admiringly, the way a person praises a knife for being sharp without considering what it cuts. She's saving me hours. At what? I asked. Light, because I wanted to like his faith in people. At everything, he said, and grinned. Maybe she could organize you. Imagine the man who thinks his wife needs an assistant, I said, and we both laughed. And then one night, she texted him at 11:12 p.m., and he said, "It's a boat we're missing on a deal." And I learned how often boats depart at exactly 11:12. There were signs, I suppose, but signs look like scenery until you know what they mean. He started shaving twice a day. He stopped finishing the endings of his sentences. He set his phone face down and apologized for being fried. When I asked him if he was tired of us, he kissed my forehead and called me tenacious again. "We're better than most," he said, as if marriages were a leaderboard. The confession came like a press release, carefully phrased, pre-approved, unassailable. "I have to be honest," he said. "I'm in love with her. It wasn't intentional." "Most harm isn't," I said, my voice peculiar in its own calm. "She sees me," he said. "Like, really sees me." He glanced at me, perhaps regretting the phrasing, and I nodded as though we were co-writing it. "I see you," I said, "standing in our house, saying you're in love with your subordinate and want me to make it noble for you." "We can do this kindly," he pleaded. "We can be adults." "I have always been one," I said, and put the kettle on because the alternative was breaking every glass we owned. He moved into a rental with a view of the river that meant nothing to me. His mother called to say she hoped I wouldn't be vindictive, a word that sounded like a coat she wanted me to try on so she could describe it to her friends. I mailed back the gifts from our wedding I didn't want to keep, boxed in tissue with a list of who to thank again. I refused to crumple. People mistook it for forgiveness, but it was architecture. I was building the spine I should have had all along. Once, months after he left, I saw them together at a coffee shop. She was leaning forward laughing, and he looked younger, like a man in a catalog. She saw me see them and flashed me a small, bright smile, the kind that's meant to look gracious while cutting. I lifted my cup in a gesture that could have been a toast or a goodbye, then walked out, my pulse an even drum. That was the day I decided that if I ever had power, it would be the kind that didn't announce itself. The thing about being left is that people think it's contagious. Friends who used to text daily drift to the safer shores of his new narrative. Couples we hosted start answering messages as a unit, apologizing for being slammed. His sister sends a parcel of banana bread and a note that says, "We love you both. This is complicated." And I stare at the loaf as if it can tell me whether love needs qualifiers to survive. Bills multiplied. Lawyers translated love into line items. I learned the steep price of the storage unit he no longer needed because he'd only had 3 boxes and a new life. The settlement felt like a well-mannered robbery. No guns, just pens. "This is fair," he told me outside the courthouse, as if fairness were a math he could show his new wife one day. He reached for my forearm the way people do in movies when they reminisce about the person they did wrong. I stepped back because I didn't want to give the scene that kind of symmetry. Sienna came over with soup and a notebook. "We're making lists," she said, drawing columns. "One for panic, one for plan." "In that order?" I asked. "Always," she said, and we wrote down practical things. Change passwords, cancel joint memberships, keep the skillet, inform the dentist. We wrote down softer things. Don't sleep with the lamp on out of stubbornness. Call your aunt back. Wear the coat that makes you feel like your own witness. When the panic list ran long, we moved entries over to the plan column like ferrying people to the right island. His texts became strangely cordial. "How are you? Did you keep the blue Dutch oven? Lila thinks you might want the espresso machine. She doesn't drink coffee." It was always Lila thinks, as if the thoughtfulness could be borrowed. "Tell Lila I drink tea," I replied once, and put my phone face down because some echoes aren't worth hearing. At work, whispers had a life of their own. I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror and practiced faces I could wear to meetings, attentive, unbothered, fully briefed. People pulled me aside with tilted heads and said things like, "You look amazing," which is how we compliment women who have been publicly broken. I said thank you, because sometimes survival is accepting the wrong compliment with grace. The invitation arriving was almost funny in its inevitability, like the last predictable beat in a song I didn't choose. I wanted to rage, to post, to warn, to make a bonfire of their perfect beige stationery, but rage is loud and brief and leaves you smelling like smoke. I chose containment. I put the card in the drawer and took the trash out and watered the fern, and when Sienna said, "You're too calm," I told her, "calm isn't passive. Calm is pressure applied where it counts." "What counts?" she asked. "Quiet consequences," I said, and wrote it down in the plan column, because names matter. That night, in bed, I spoke to the ceiling the way people pray when they're not sure who's listening. "I don't want to ruin them," I said. "I want to remove myself from their food supply." I slept without dreaming, which felt like a small mercy I'd earned. I started with the smallest hinge, my inbox. I drafted one email to HR to confirm dates, one to payroll to update direct deposit, one to the firm's ethics officer reminding them, politely, precisely, of our policy on relationships between supervisors and their direct reports. "This is not a complaint," I wrote, choosing each word like a bead. "It is a disclosure to protect the company and myself." I added no drama, no accusation, just dates and definitions, and attached a copy of the policy with 2 sections highlighted. My cursor hovered over send. I pressed it, and my pulse didn't spike. That felt like power. I called my attorney and asked her to reopen the narrow window about stock options he'd failed to list. "You're right on the deadline," she said, impressed or simply awake. "You sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "This isn't spite. It's arithmetic." I reached out to people in our shared orbit, board members' wives I'd met at charity events, junior analysts I'd once mentored, not to gossip. To ask about their projects and mean it, to offer help with proposals, to show up for coffee and listen. Word travels 2 ways, and I wanted mine to travel like a rumor of competence. "You're glowing," someone said at a breakfast I almost skipped. "New skincare?" "New habits," I said, and we both let it stand. Sienna texted at midnight, "How's Operation Quiet Consequences?" I replied, patient, precise, boring in a way that terrifies them. A week before the RSVP deadline, I opened the drawer and took out the card. I wrote in my neatest hand, "Regretfully declines," then paused. The smaller card asked for a song request for the dance floor. I thought of writing something petty. "Before he cheats," something cathartic, but pettiness is the tax you pay on attention, and I'm done paying his taxes. I left it blank. Lila texted again, all brightness. "Just checking you saw the registry. No pressure, but we'd love your presence." I typed, "I wish you both clarity." Then deleted it. I wrote, "Received. Wishing you what you've chosen." I printed the email threads with HR and my attorney and filed them by month. I updated my LinkedIn headline and posted a short reflection on leading with integrity during transitions, which is a sentence that means everything when people know what to read into it and nothing when they don't. 3 women messaged me to say they felt seen. 2 asked me to mentor them. One of them worked in Aaron's division. He called. "Did you talk to ethics?" he asked, not angry, but pitched high, like a man hearing his own echo in a canyon. "I disclosed," I said. "We have a policy." I complied. "You're trying to ruin me." "I'm refusing to lie for you," I said, and let the sentence rest between us like a cool glass. "You could have come to me first." "I did," I said, remembering the couch, the kettle, the catalog face. "You told me it was an evolution." That was cruel. "Evolution usually is," I said, then softer, because I am not made of stone. "Aaron, you can be decent now. It's not too late to be decent." He hung up without answering, which is also an answer. I did not go to the wedding. I sent back the RSVP in its perfect envelope and kept my Saturday for myself like a rare coin you don't spend on candy. Sienna came over in leggings with a bag of groceries and a look that said she was ready to triage any emotional surprise. "What's our plan?" she asked, dropping onions and lemons on the counter. "We cook," I said. "We eat well. We don't check hashtags." She raised an eyebrow. "Not even a little?" "Not even a peek," I said. Though later, alone, I let my thumb hover over the search bar and then set my phone face down like a promise to myself. I am not a monk, but I am stubborn, and stubbornness in the right hands is a sanctuary. Still, I prepared the ground. The night before, I'd mailed a small, elegant package to their venue's events coordinator, a bottle of excellent non-alcoholic champagne, and a handwritten note on thick paper. "For any guest who chooses not to drink but deserves a toast," I wrote, "with thanks for your hospitality to all." I signed only my first name. I knew the coordinator. I'd met her at a fundraiser, and she'd told me once that she disliked how brides' families ignored sober guests. The gesture wasn't sabotage. It was a mirror angled just so. I wanted any story told about me that weekend to be inconveniently kind. In the morning, I went for a run by the river that meant nothing to me and let it mean nothing. I stopped at the market and bought daisies and eggs. Back home, I cracked shells against the rim of a bowl and listened to the sweet authority of the whisk. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I didn't check it. I plated the omelet, I poured coffee, I sat at my table and ate the way you eat when there is no performance, slowly, fully, alone, without being lonely. Around noon, my attorney called. "He settled on the options," she said, cheerful. "Signed 5 minutes ago." "On his wedding day," I said, and couldn't help the smallest smile. "Apparently someone at HR nudged him with a timeline," she said. "You're very civilized, Mara." "Civilization is my kink," I said, and she laughed in that surprised way people do when they realize you have a sense of humor after all. Sienna and I spent the afternoon marinating chicken, dancing terrible in the kitchen, making a mess that had a beginning and an end. She checked her phone more than I did and flinched once, sheepish. "A cousin posted a story," she confessed. "It's beige, like aggressively tasteful. You're not missing much." "Good," I said, and meant it. At dusk, I carried the daisies to the footbridge and left them in the narrow metal vase someone had welded there years ago for reasons I've never known. People tuck flowers in, and the city pretends not to notice. I tucked mine in and whispered, "For what I loved, for what I didn't," and felt only the clean ache of letting. The next morning, my phone held a handful of messages. One was from an analyst I'd mentored. "Heard a weird thing at the wedding. Someone joked about company policy. People are paying attention. You okay?" Another was from the events coordinator. "Your note made my night." We placed the bottle at the sweetheart table. Bride asked who it was from. I said a guest who values everyone's comfort. The last was from a number I didn't recognize until I read it twice. "Thank you for the bottle." It was oddly perfect. L. I typed and erased a dozen responses. Finally, I wrote, "I hope you enjoy what you've chosen. That's all any of us gets." Then I put my phone away and stood in my kitchen and realized what had shifted. Not him, not her, not the town, not the job. Me. The story had a new center of gravity, and it was where it always should have been, under my feet. I washed the pan, I wiped the counter, I opened the window and let the morning in. The breeze lifted the corner of the invitation I'd taken out of the drawer to throw away and hadn't yet. I picked it up, tore it once, then again, not from anger, but for neatness. The pieces looked like confetti. I didn't throw them. I put them in the bin, closed the lid, and turned toward the day I'd made. 3 weeks after the wedding, the first ripple reached me through an unlikely source. A message from Lydia, the board member's wife who'd once leaned over at a gala to ask if my bracelet was vintage. Saw Aaron at the quarterly mixer. "He looks stressed. Everything okay?" I stared at it for a minute, then replied with a neutral, "We're no longer in touch, but I wish him well." That sentence tasted like fine china. Smooth, unchipped, incapable of betraying what it once held. 2 days later, Sienna sent a screenshot from a mutual's social feed. Lila, in a silk blouse, smiling without showing teeth, captioned, "Monday blues and building dreams." The comments were polite, but not warm, and one, from someone I didn't know, simply read, "Integrity matters." "She's getting flack?" Sienna said over the phone, a grin in her voice. "Not from me," I said, and meant it. I'd learned that the most satisfying revenge doesn't carry your fingerprints. I kept my focus on work. The mentoring sessions I'd started were growing into real opportunities, for them, and unexpectedly, for me. One young analyst asked if I'd join her in pitching a client Aaron's firm had once courted but never landed. It wasn't about him, I told myself, but when the deal closed and my name was on the contract, I let the satisfaction be what it was: quiet and complete. By mid-spring, word of their strained finances trickled through back channels. The Riverview rental was being sublet. They'd moved into a smaller unit temporarily. Aaron emailed me, brief and stiff, "Would you be open to meeting for coffee?" I read it twice, then deleted it without answering. Choosing silence was a skill I'd honed to an art, a way of saying you no longer have access without a single word. And yet, there was a new awareness growing in me. His world was not collapsing in a spectacular fire. It was sagging in slow, embarrassing increments, the kind you don't post about. That was better. Fires invite sympathy. Slow leaks invite reflection. One evening, as I left a networking dinner, I saw them across the street. He spotted me first, his step faltering just enough to register before he touched Lila's elbow and kept walking. I didn't wave, didn't slow down, just turned the corner, my heels steady against the pavement. I always imagined the first face-to-face would happen by accident, like slipping on black ice and somehow catching myself with grace. In the end, I scheduled it. Not because I owed him anything, but because I finally understood that closure doesn't arrive like a package. You have to sign for it. "Bring a witness," Sienna said, pushing a lemon across my counter like it was a chess piece, or at least a bright lipstick. "I'll bring the version of me that doesn't argue with weather," I said, smiling. "That should be enough." We met at a hotel bar that smelled of citrus and polished wood, a place with chairs that encourage good posture and a pianist who knows how to stay out of the way. I chose a seat facing the door so I could see him arrive. He was on time, wearing the suit that promised competence, not brilliance. For a moment, only a moment, I remembered the first time I'd watched him cross a room toward me and thought, "Oh, there you are." Then the thought vanished, like fog in sun. "Mara," he said, halting at the line where intimacy turns into formality. "Thank you for meeting." "Order what you like," I said, motioning to the menu. "I'm having tea." "Tea," he repeated, and the waiter appeared as if choreographed. Aaron asked for sparkling water. We sat. The pianist slipped into something from the 70s that I liked without recognizing. "They've opened an inquiry," he began too quickly. "Ethics. It's more of a formality, but—" "I'm not here to discuss company process," I said, gentle as a warning. "I disclosed because I follow rules I agreed to. What you do is your business." He laughed without humor. "Right, your calm has always been unnerving." "It's not a tactic," I said. "It's the only way I hear myself think." He looked older than the wedding photos. Not ruined, no one gets that tidy a justice, but thinner, the skin around his mouth learning new lines. "I thought we could talk," he said, and his voice softened. "I mean really talk, without—" He gestured vaguely, as if our entire shared history were a smudge he could rub off with his sleeve. "Then talk," I said. "I'm sorry," he blurted, almost boyish in the way his eyes searched my face for the door he used to walk through. "I know that sounds late or cheap, but I am. I told myself stories about evolution and honesty because I wanted what I wanted without the ugliness of taking it. You didn't deserve that." "I didn't," I said, not as a dagger, but as a ledger entry. His gaze dropped to the napkin he was folding and unfolding. "Things aren't easy," he added, and there it was. The soft weather report men give when they want shelter, without asking for it. "We're figuring it out." It's different on the other side of the storyline. She's not the villain people want her to be. I never cast her, I said. That was you. He flinched at at cast. I'm realizing, he said, voice low, that I mistook admiration for intimacy. She admired my work, my tempo. It felt like being seen. But it was being praised. Those aren't the same. You're not the first person to confuse applause with listening, I said. The tea arrived. I wrapped my fingers around the cup and felt its steady heat move into my hands like permission. If you called me here to be forgiven, I can't offer that on a timeline. If you called me to be absolved at work, I won't. If you called me because the world is colder than you expected, I recommend a coat. He almost smiled, then didn't. You sound happy. I sound intact, I said. Happiness comes and goes. Integrity sticks. He glanced at the piano, at the door, at me again. Do you ever miss us? I miss who I was with myself, I said, surprised by the clarity of it as it came out. The version of me who thought building a life with someone meant carrying both ends of the ladder indefinitely, even when the house changed. I don't miss her self-disrespect. I do miss her faith before it was spent. He nodded, and there was something like relief in it, as if he'd come prepared for flames and found a steady candle instead. Lila wanted me to ask if you'd meet her. For what? I said, not unkindly. A panel on modern civility? He winced. To apologize. She can mail it, I said. I'm not collecting in person. Silence sat down with us and crossed its legs. The pianist played something tender. Finally, he said, I keep thinking about the day I told you. You went to make tea. I put the kettle on so I wouldn't break the glasses, I said. There's a difference between control and denial. That day, I learned the difference. He breathed out, slow. Mara, I am sorry, he said again, more quietly. I hope you have everything you want. I already have what I wouldn't trade, I said, standing. A room I recognize when I'm alone in it. We shook hands like colleagues who might recommend each other to an enemy. At the door, he paused. You look... He stopped himself, revised. You are well. I am, I said, and walked into a bright afternoon that didn't ask for my story before letting me in. Outside, Sienna texted, You alive? Alive and hungry, I wrote back. I have dumplings and gossip, she replied. Bring the dumplings. Keep the gossip warm, I answered, and felt the day tilt toward me like something earned. I didn't plan a final move so much as notice it forming, the way a shoreline lengthens after a storm, without any single wave to credit. Life kept doing its humble work. The mentorship program turned into a formal initiative. The young analyst I'd helped asked me to co-author a white paper. My name showed up on agendas that used to forget me. I found, to my private astonishment, that I loved public speaking when the subject was something I'd bled for. After one talk, a woman in a navy dress gripped my hand and said, You sounded like a house with its lights on. I went home and lit every lamp I owned just to see what she meant. What arrived from the other camp was predictable in its unpredictability. A terse email from HR confirming resolution of the disclosure review, a LinkedIn post from Aaron about learning and leadership, a wedding photo's quiet dissent from his profile. From a distance, that's how the story ends. Algorithmic edits. Up close, I knew it was ending in frayed towels and late-night conversations about money, in breakfasts eaten over the sink. That's not schadenfreude, it's geology. Choices make terrain. The invitation's remnants were long gone when a new envelope appeared. This one slim, stamped with the name of a philanthropic foundation. Inside was a letter asking if I would consult on a corporate ethics panel the following quarter. The board chair had heard my talk. We're building culture upstream, she wrote. Your voice would help. I said yes, not because it was about him, it wasn't, but because my future deserved me to be busy when the past knocked. And knock it did. One evening my doorbell chimed, and there was Lila, smaller than the idea of her, cardigan draped like a flag of truce. For a beat I stared at her through the glass, the symmetry so on the nose it felt like a script I didn't audition for. I opened the door to the chain. Hi, she said, voice soft with practiced humility. I shouldn't have come unannounced. I wanted to apologize properly. She lifted a small box. Olive oil. I heard you cook. Everyone cooks, I said. Some of us eat what we make. I left the chain where it was. I was cruel, she said, color rising. Not just to you, to myself. I believed the story he told me about what you were. Cold, withholding, too focused on work. I wanted to be the antidote. I realized too late that I'd been rehearsing his lines. I watched her find the shape of the confession like a person tracing furniture in the dark. I don't need your apology, I said, even as a part of me recognized the cost it took for her to arrive here. You need it, so say it for yourself. I'm sorry, she said, hands shaking. I am so sorry. Thank you, I said, and meant it the way you mean it when a storm finally names itself. Take care of your life. Her eyes filled, quick and angry at their own betrayal. Are you happy? She asked, and then flushed. I don't know why I asked that. It's not my right. I'm something better, I said. I'm not beholden. She nodded, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand like a child who just remembered she can. We're separating, she blurted, and then laughed at herself. That's not why I came, but you don't have to give me reasons, I said. I'm not collecting them either. She set the olive oil on the mat, as if placing a flower on water. Good night, Mara. Good night, I said, and shut the door gently, like ending a chapter with the punctuation it deserves. Later, Sienna sprawled on my couch, reading a draft of the white paper while I seared zucchini and let the kitchen smell like home. Is this the last act? She asked without looking up. Or are we in epilogue territory? I don't want an epilogue, I said, slicing lemon over the pan. I want a prologue that never ends. She groaned. You poet, fine. What's the prologue say? It says, here is a woman who keeps her own keys, I said. It says, she learned to be loud in the places that require volume and quiet in the places that feed on noise. It says, she takes long walks without checking who sees. We ate at the table I once avoided because chairs feel accusatory when you're newly alone. Now they felt like witnesses who file only good reports. After dinner, I opened windows and let the evening in. The city hummed its low song. The final move, if I must name it, was refusing to consecrate the past with any more of my days. I booked a small trip by myself to a coastline I used to imagine visiting as a two. I ordered a red raincoat. I packed a paperback and a pair of shoes that made me taller without demanding penance from my feet. At the airport, I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb, not as a dare, but as a benediction. On the plane, a woman next to me was writing postcards in lavender ink. Do people still mail those? I asked, and she smiled. If it matters, I put it on paper, she said. Screens feel like weather. I thought of the invitation, of the bottle I'd sent to the wedding, of the mail that arrives with other people's names and insists on being read. Sometimes paper is the point, I said. Sometimes not responding is. At the coast, the sky was a language I could finally read. I walked the long curve of shore where the tide tutored the sand in letting go and letting return. When the raincoat met the drizzle exactly as designed, I laughed out loud, and nobody minded. That night, I ate at a small place where the server said, "Trust me?" And I did. And the meal tasted like a promise kept. Back home, a single envelope waited in my mailbox. Thick, creamy, familiar in quality, but not in tone. The foundation. Inside, a contract and a note. We admire your spine as much as your voice. I signed with my full name, the one I had before and during and after him, and set the pen down with a small private flourish. There is an old superstition that says you must not sweep at night because you'll brush out your luck. I opened the closet, took out the broom, and cleaned my floor anyway, slow and thorough, pushing crumbs toward the pan until the room felt new. When I turned off the last lamp, the house kept its shape in the dark. I climbed into bed and slept deeply, unobserved, unjudged, unafraid. In the morning, I made tea. The kettle sang, I didn't. My phone stayed quiet. The only thing on my calendar was a walk with a woman I'd recently met. Funny, thoughtful, interested in the world with a generosity that felt like shade on a hot day. Maybe it would become nothing. Maybe it would become a friendship. Maybe it would change the shape of a future I had stopped fearing to imagine. This, then, is the revenge they never see coming. A life that refuses to be a counterpoint to theirs. A life that steadies and steadies and steadies until one day you notice you are not bracing anymore. You are simply standing and the ground beneath you is yours.